Hi, we continue in Genesis 34 today as Shechem's father Hamor has come to Jacob and his sons and made an offer, exchanged daughters and land, and they could become one people. And as we look at this, we're going to see now Shechem is going to respond with his own message, and then Jacob's sons will respond deceitfully, and we'll see what the stage is set for in our next video. So to set our context, as you can see on the right side of the screen, we've been following through the Jacob cycle here, and now we're in this section here, and we're going to be completing that soon. And some of the issues we've been looking at, which we went over in the introductory video to this unit, which you haven't watched. If you haven't watched, I really encourage you to do it. We've been going through all of these. And now we're on the question here of number 9 and 10 of how should we evaluate the brother's deceitful counteroffer that we'll see momentarily, and the question of marriage with the Canaanites, and the implicit question that's never addressed directly: if Jacob's sons are not supposed to marry Canaanites like the Hivites, who are they supposed to marry? And we'll see there's an ambiguity in the story around that question as well. And also we're going to look here at the question of the land. We looked at it briefly last time, but plainly, although many scholars see this as a question of intermarriage, I'm trying to point out throughout that the ethnic identity of this group, the Hivites, is only mentioned once at the beginning, and mentioned several times, as we can see in this structural outline with the key words, is how much they've defiled their sister or their daughter, as you can see here many times in the underlined elements. And we'll see an element of that today in this piece here. So it's not so much about ethnicity, it's about what happens when one encounters foreigners, if you will, or more importantly, city people, which we'll see is the key in chapter 35, when as soon as they leave, God in the form of El casts a terror upon all the cities of the region. So when the city people do the kind of violent thing they do, what are you supposed to do, and how do you access the land? So we've seen the question of the land in relationship with Genesis 23, and we'll see a link of that also today. And we'll look at this part when we get to the next video next time. So to look at our structural context that I was just hinting at here, the framed part here is a chiasm we've been going through. We went through this part so far, and we're going to go through the other part today. And it's followed by this nice tight chiasm in verses 20 to 24 around how Hamor and Shechem present the message to all who went out of the gate of the city. And we'll see how that's a key word phrase that although it's only used a couple of times, it indicates more precisely who these people are and what the context of that situation is. So we've also been looking at a number of the parallels between this scene and others, and one of the elements is how this scene, the whole chapter, is parallel to earlier, this is the David and Bathsheba one. Let's jump rather to the earlier in Genesis, and we'll go back to that one in a second. So we can see we've seen all of these so far, and today we're going to see the question of finding favor, just as Jacob wanted to find favor with his brother Esau, and we'll see the only other use of the Hebrew word mirmar here for the plan of Simeon and Levi here to act deceitfully to Hamor and Shechem, and similarly here as Jacob acted deceitfully toward Esau. We'll also see the rare use of arala for foreskin. It's translated here uncircumcised, but it's not circumcised with a preface. It's a separate word, his foreskin. So we could say who is foreskinned here, and that's what we have here. And we'll also see herpa, only these 2 times in Genesis. It would be a disgrace to gather with people or to join with people who are not circumcised, and here we hear God has taken away the reproach of Leah here. So we see a number of aspects of that. Next time, we'll begin to look at this interesting parallel about the gate of the city and the people who go in and out of it, which links us a little bit, not so much to this one here, but to this one. Sorry for going back and forth on those. So we'll see here in Genesis 23, Ephron the Hittite speaks in the presence of all who went in at the gate of the city, which is to say all the people of the city. And we'll see here, using Schmutzer's article from 2007, how all who went out of the gate of the city has a whole different meaning, and a very precise meaning that shapes our story here. And the other element here is the parallels and differences between this story and the Amnon-Tamar rape story that we'll see in our 2 Samuel series. And we've seen these parallels so far. And we'll see how this is setting up for the fact that Dinah is defended by her full brothers, not her half-brothers, who are not mentioned here, just as Tamar will be defended by her full brother Absalom. The one that I was jumping around that I wasn't quite ready for is this one, the parallels with Bathsheba. And we can see that we're in this section here, that as Shechem seeks to marry Dinah, David marries Bathsheba. He did not need permission from anybody, of course, because he was the king. And we'll see also how the parallels in this here in reverse, that Dinah's full brothers, as I've just been noting and we'll see, try to prevent the marriage through their deceitfulness. And David has Bathsheba's husband Uriah killed to allow for the marriage. So we'll see all those parallels as we go. So let's just say, having said that, jump into our scene. So note in our chiastic shape, I put this in the sense of A, B, C, C, B, A, which is one way a chiasm could be. We could also put this all as a C in the center, the offers of the Hivites to the sons of Jacob. But I separated it out this way because the narrator does that. Hamor spoke with him saying, and then separately, Shechem also said. So it's really a separate paragraph there. And notice how the father spoke in terms of the kind of alliance that two kings might make, even though we saw in the beginning that Shechem is actually the chief or the leader of the Hivites, not his father at this point. But he had made offers of intermarriage and of settling in the land and trading it and getting property, which is literally to have possession. Shechem, though, will speak simply of his own desire and the marriage situation. So that's where we have to consider is his apparent willingness to pay any price, not quite any price, but at least any material price, justify the action he did earlier. Whether we saw it as a rape or not, it was certainly a non-consensual sexual act by someone coming upon a stranger. And then we're going to see here how this phrase, here as a Nevilah committed a folly in Israel, is paired with because he defiled their sister as part of the chiastic reply that's in our mind and their mind, but not in the minds of Shechem and Hamor and the Hivites as they hear the counter offer that we'll see here. So let's just jump right in. So as my note below already says on his offer, Shechem's offer ironically is like Jacob's longing for Rachel, but with a very different approach and outcome. So Shechem said to her father, notice not named as Jacob here or brother specified, but more generically to the father-to-father element, let me find favor with you, like Jacob sought with Esau, as I just noted, literally in your eyes, and that in your eyes will match ironically here with their words were good in the eyes of Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, which is to say Shechem seeking to find favor in the family of Jacob's eyes, and what ends up happening is the family of Jacob finds favor in Hamor and Shechem's eyes. So that's the invitation here. And whatever you say to me, I will give. In other words, anything you would ask, he's offering a blank check opening here, and then he specifies it in more detail here. That's a note we already saw. Put the marriage present, mohar, which is only two other times, and interestingly, it's in 1 Samuel 18:25 when it's expressed by the demand for 100 Philistine foreskins, which David provides to get Michal, the daughter of Saul, with 200 foreskins. So foreskins isn't mentioned yet, but it will be, and that's one of only the two references I note here of mohar for marriage present. And the word for gift here, matan, only here in Genesis and only 3 times in Proverbs and once in Numbers otherwise, has nothing specifically to do with marriage, but it's just a word for a gift in general. So by suggesting the marriage present, the mohar, the dowry, if you will, although it's on the male side, not the female side, where it really typically would be, and some other gift as high as you like, or as increased, greatly increased, meod, for a strong adjective, meaning stronger or very, something like that. So increase it as high as you like, and I will give whatever you ask me. Notice how open-ended that is. He wants to find favor, but demand anything from us. And I wonder what would happen if they had just demanded material things, as he asks, and not done what they'd done, but we will never know. Only give me the girl to be my wife, which misleads us in the translation, literally, et ha'anar ar la'isha, which is to say a change of status here from a girl to a woman. As I've noted many times here, there is no word in Hebrew for wife or husband. It's only the possessive form of my woman. So that's what's at issue here. The diminutive term na'ar, like she was young, and now to be a full-grown woman. So that's the offer there. And yet we hear no response to that. We hear no response at all about here's the amount of the gift or the marriage present. Instead, we just hear this. The sons of Jacob noted here, and we see them a number of times here, but notice we don't know exactly who those are yet. Is that Levi and Shechem? Is this all of them? We're going to find out later about that. but it seems to be collectively here. And notice that Jacob is silent throughout. So I'd highlighted earlier around the question that we looked at here about what do we make of Jacob's silence, that some scholars saw that as his reticence or his fear or his cowardice, but with the help of Lynn Bechdel's understanding that this is a communal story, not an individual story as in our cultural context, that Jacob was waiting for his sons to make a family decision. And yet, as I noted then and as we see now, that doesn't happen. Jacob is simply silent here, and the sons speak. It's as if Shechem spoke and his father was silent, but of course we saw the father speak and Shechem speak. So Jacob will be silent throughout. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father deceitfully, using a mirma, as I noted earlier, as Sternberg notes below, that the Hebrew term does not in itself express condemnation, but must be determined in context. And I really want to highlight that because a number, especially of Christian scholars, Jewish scholars don't tend to do this, but Christian scholars, seeing the Bible as primarily a moral book, see deceit as immoral from their perspective, and therefore wonder how the Bible could characterize Mr. Israel, Jacob himself, as deceitful. But as Sternberg notes, deceit is a strategy, especially for the weak in the face of the strong. We saw it in Rebecca's refusing to stand up to Rachel refusing to stand up to her brother Laban when she was sitting on the teraphim, the household gods, under the saddle. And we certainly saw how that was because as a woman and as someone trying to get away, she had less power than her father. And we see how deceit is often what James Scott, the anthropologist, called a weapon of the weak in the face of the strong. So as Sternberg notes, we can't just assume this is bad. We have to see what it is in context. And we know many examples of that from our cultural context. For example, if you had Jews in your basement when the Nazis came, the moral thing, of course, would be to lie to them, to act deceitfully to them, and not tell them you have the Jews who they would kill. So even in our cultural context, we know deceit is often the moral thing to do. But we do have to determine it from context, and scholars argue about that. But I want to highlight that whatever we decide about the balance between Shechem's love and desire and the sons of Jacob's deceitful plan for violence, all of this is happening, as I noted in the opening videos, because Jacob did not listen to the voice of God telling him to settle later, whether that's in Beersheba or as in Bethel, as we'll see. But because he settled soon, he's facing the problems of non-city people in the face of city people. So although we're tempted because of our desire to solve problems and reach conclusions, to get an answer to the question of which is morally superior, neither of them are the right answer. The right answer was not to settle near Shechem, and that we need to remember that throughout. So they answered deceitfully because he had defiled their sister Dinah. And I want to really highlight that because the author, and through the form of the narrator, could not make more clear that this is not about intermarriage. It's not about their foreignness. It's about what they did. You notice the he here is individual, but as Sternberg notes, it equates Shechem and Hamor with the him who had defiled and suggests the complicity of father and son in the brother's eyes. The phrase for had defiled here, teme, we saw in verse 5, and we see it in 13, and then we'll see it down here in verse 27. And notice their sister. We'll see it as daughter in a minute. We'll take our daughter in verse 17, but here the narrator refers to it as their sister. And as Sternberg notes again, a shift to a more subjective relationship than Jacob's daughter, quoting Sternberg here, it tightens the causal link between feeling and proceeding, violent action, and guileful counteraction. Furthermore, it comes in the face of the indifference of the father to the fate of the daughter of Leah, as we heard in verse 1. So here they said to him, and the Septuagint has Simeon and Levi specified here, but the Hebrew text does not. So we don't know yet who exactly is speaking. And as so often happens in Genesis and the Bible more generally, the groups speak in one collective voice. We cannot do this thing, or literally, we absolutely are not able to make this word as I translated it here. And to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, or literally who has a foreskin, noting back to 1725 and the last time in Genesis. As Westerman notes, it's the mark of belonging to the group, and that's exactly what's being named here. No religious significance is given. It has nothing to do with El or Yahweh. That's not mentioned. It just has to do with a mark of ethnic identity. So that would be a disgrace for us, using a different word, herpa, as I noted, with the one taking away the disgrace of the mother earlier, Leah. So that would be a disgrace, not a defilement. It doesn't make them impure, but it's a disgrace in the sense that it's contrary to who they understand themselves to be. And certainly that much is true. There's nothing deceitful about that, and there's nothing deceitful about the proposal. What's deceitful is what they plan to do later, as we'll see. As Bechtel notes, there's no precedent for this condition. She says the suggestion of bringing these impure outsiders into the group through circumcision is as much of a violation of the community ideals as Dinah is marrying an outsider. And as I note below, gathering the connection with David, might this be a subtle response that David's gaining 200 Philistine foreskins to marry Michal? Only on this condition, or literally, surely in this will we consent to you. And note the word for consent, oath. The word for oath spells the same as oath for sign, like the sign of circumcision in 1711, as you can see here. So, as Brisman notes, it's the question of whether the human obligation is to walk before God and be pure, as in 17:1, or whether circumcision itself is the man's half of the bargain. So only on this condition that you will become as we are. And the Hebrew is pretty identical to that. And isn't that a pregnant phrase? Because how much could be included in you will become as we are? Does that mean you leave the city behind? Does that mean you have a specific relationship with El or Yahweh? It's wide open, but it becomes clear in the next phrase. Every male among you must be circumcised. Notice not every man, every male here, using the word zakar. And as my note below, taken literally, it would apply to the cattle, as we see in Genesis 6:19, of every living thing, male and female. So male and female is not the same as man and woman, as I've noted throughout the Genesis series, especially in the creation story in chapter 1. It refers, as you just saw, to all creatures that are gendered that way. So it could mean all the cattle, but plainly is understood as simply the humans, and we're going to see in the next video exactly which humans are involved. Then they continue, if you're willing to do this thing, then we will give our daughters to you. But which daughters are those? We know that Dinah is the only daughter in the family, and they already have her. They don't know, the Hivites don't know that there are no other daughters, and to the extent that Jacob's sons are adults here, they might see that. But of course, we don't know that most of them have wives, and the Hivites could see that there weren't that many women around. And they certainly could see there aren't any visible daughters. Who those daughters are, that's certainly part of the deception to suggest they even have daughters. But notice the give and take. We will give our daughters to you, and you can see the giving and taking all over here with give and take. And we will take your daughters for ourselves, ironically fulfilled at verse 29, but not the way that's being proposed. And we will live among you, and I've been noting throughout that the verb for live is the verb for settle, which we've seen throughout here, settle with us, and raising the issue of the settling too soon, as I was just suggesting a couple minutes ago. And so we will settle among you and become one people. Notice they leave out the trading issue and gaining property, which is ultimately the question of getting into the land, and the Genesis is offering an alternative to either the Deuteronomy Joshua view that the way to do it is to destroy them all, or the Ezra Nehemiah view is to exclude them all. Either way, the question of being one people is a key question. As my note below has, with echoes of Babel, it implies the magnetic attraction of urban power that pulls all into its orbit of influence. It is an added term agreed to by the city council in the next scene. And as Wenham notes below, in contrast with one nation, it implies, quote, a group that sees itself primarily in terms of common descent, a super tribe or overgrown family. In other words, Jacob's sons insist that money has nothing to do with marriage. It is a question of religious identity. But I would note that I was just noting earlier from another source, not so much about religious identity as ethnic identity, because there's no mention here of God as being part of this in any way. And notice there's no mention of God in the story at all. But the counter suggestion, if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, we will take our daughter and be gone. And that's the first time we're noting that they don't have her. And we'll see that in verse 26 when they take her from Shechem's house. But now we realize the dynamics are such that the Shechem people have Dinah, and the question is getting her back. So that really changes the strategy here and the dynamics when we know that they don't have possession of their daughter. Their words pleased Hamor and Shechem. Literally, their words were good in their eyes, as I was noting the parallel with Shechem's desire to find favor in the eyes of Jacob's sons. And then we hear this before we close for today. And the young men, using Na'ar, exactly what was used for Dinah, did not delay to do this thing, or literally the word, matching the same phrase here. The word for delay here, makar, is only for the delay that Abraham's servant said he would not want any more of to Laban and the family in taking Rebekah back. And then this delay here about Laban and Jacob there. Because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. And the word hafetz here for delight is only here in Genesis. It's 78 times in the Hebrew scripture. But in Deuteronomy 21, one of the legal examples we noted was in the background, but not applicable to the characters in the story, because they don't know anything about Deuteronomy in their story context, referring to marrying beautiful captive women. As Wenham notes, suggests a more intense degree of attachment than the previous words that we've seen. And notice now it's Jacob's daughter, not their sister or their daughter, as we'll see. As they just mentioned, we'll take our daughter and go, but Jacob's daughter. And then we get this addition, which isn't obvious why it needs to be there, but here it is. Now he, Shechem referring to, was the most honored, or literally the most glorified, or literally most heavy, the word kabod, meaning glory, only by implication, because it literally means something heavy. In that sense, glory, like a lot of gold, would be heavier, and something that's heavy would be more glorious than something that's light. So he's more glorified than all his father's house. Family is misleading there. It's the Beit Ab. And Beit Ab is important because this is all about fathers and sons and land, as we'll see. We don't know anything about the rest of his family any more than they know anything about the rest of Jacob's family. Does he have siblings, male or female? Are there other children? We know nothing about the rest of his family. This implies there are more, but we will never see them. So with everything set up, Hamor and Shechem will take it to the gate of the city and speak to the men there, and we'll see what that implies about the outcome that Simeon and Levi have in mind. See you for that next time. Bye-bye.